Every employee is expected to work long hours, 9, 10 hours a day, and then they're expected to upskill themselves. So that creates more burden for the employees itself. You can't put a bunch of 40 adults and say, we're going to train you on something. They have to see value. If I do this particular skill or program, it helps me to deliver better.
Is upskilling at scale actually working? Or are we clinging to the idea more than the actual impact on ground?
The challenge we have is many times when people go through these programs and they're not given an opportunity to apply the learning. Big gap today for organizations. How do you know what are the skill gaps you have? Infusing GenAI makes us smarter, work faster, and more adaptive. A lot of content is available today that is meant for the masses, but it's not customized for the individual. The investment is not of benefit. So, as much as you want to put 100,000 people on a GenAI training, do you have an opportunity to keep this 100,000 people and apply that in their day jobs?
Hello, everyone. I am Nikhil Kulkarni, partner at Zinnov, and welcome to Hot Takes and Hard Truths, a sub-series of our Business Resilience podcast. Every time there is a large technology shift happening, whether it was cloud, automation, or now Gen AI, there's someone out there writing the obituary for tech services. It's over, they say. This industry won't survive the next wave. And yet, the best teams keep on building. They adapt, they evolve, and they stay relevant. Right now, there is no shortage of such hot takes doing the rounds about automation killing services, Gen AI replacing engineers, and about the end of large outsourcing deals. In this series, in each episode, we pick one of those hot takes and break it down with the leaders who are actually living it. Honest conversations and real stories from the crowd. That's what we promise. And our guest for today is Mahesh Raja. Mahesh is the Chief Growth Officer at Ness Digital Engineering. Ness is a digital native full lifecycle product engineering firm which is backed by KKR. Mahesh has almost 30 years of leadership experience, most of them at Wipro. Mahesh joined Ness around 18 months ago and he leads the global sales and go to market for the firm. Welcome, Mahesh, to the podcast.
Thank you, Nikhil. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm both humbled and honored to be here today.
Great to have you too, Mahesh. So we'll get started. And the topic for today's discussion, the hot take, as we mentioned, that we are going to discuss is on upscaling. I mean, there is no shortage of investments in L&D across tech services firms right now. So the question I'll start with is right now, is upscaling at scale actually working? Or are we clinging to the idea more than the actual impact on ground?
Before I answer your question, Nikhil, first of all, this is an amazing topic to be, and the title of this podcast is Hard Truths and Facts. And when I was preparing for this, I was thinking about how open and honest I can be in some of this. So I will try to be at my best in terms of being as open and transparent. Hopefully, the audience can resonate with some of my own personal experiences as well as what I bring from my experiences in my professional journey here. So, if I rephrase the question you had about where do companies in terms of upskilling go wrong, if I can broadly say that, I look at three reasons actually, three specific reasons where companies fail based on my past experience and what I've seen at Ness here, right? Number one, companies try to catch into what I would call as the buzzwords and the generic trends which are emerging. If I use an example, AI skills, digital transformation, and how do we really upskill our talent, right? Rather than being more specific, data driven, and looking at what their employees needs to serve either their internal customers or their clients and prospects outside. So that's the first point. The second point, if I look at the employee lens perspective, right? Every employee is expected to work long hours, 9, 10 hours a day, and then they're expected to upskill themselves. So that creates more burden for the employees itself. And sometimes when they sign up for these upskilling initiatives, they're doing it half-hearted, right? So I think that's the second point which needs to be addressed by organizations, that it is not something which they have to do as a side gig, but something which be part of the mainstream. And the third and the final point is for any such program to be successful, whether it is classroom upskilling with a third party, or even to that matter, a boot camp, you need sponsorship from top of the house. You need a C-suite sponsor. There has to be a purpose. There has to be a benefit. for the employee to do it. So
No, absolutely. On all relevant points, we'll try to go into deeper into each one of them as we go ahead, right? And picking on one of the points that you mentioned, that sometimes it is driven by trends rather than what is the business demand or particular
correct.
demand for the organization, as well as the employee gap, skill gap that you mentioned that we have. What can we do to ensure that the training programs and the people in charge in doing that are more aligned to the business demand rather than just the market trends?
Yeah, I think the way I would look at that is first, right? We have a concept called skill to stock, which is pretty prevalent in the market. And what I mean by skill to stock is mostly management teams and L&D teams want to enable workforce for the future. But what they miss out is how are they making the workforce ready for today? That is one gap which needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
The second one is even if today we train our workforce, for example, on an upcoming technology, which is probably 6 months out, it is the yield on such investments is not commensurate to the investments you're making today because there are enough research papers. I remember there's a scientific model which suggests that people who go through such programs within 30 days, almost 90% of what they have learned goes away. So it is about a balance between skill to stock and skill to order. And when I say skill to order, focus on today. When I say skill to stock, focus on tomorrow, right? So now that's an important one we need to bridge. Now, in terms of how organizations like Ness is focusing on is we are focusing on the mantra of right skills at the right time.
Yeah.
So we don't force any programs on our 3,700 employees until there is a business need associated with it. And the
Yeah.
business needs also has to be clearly quantified in terms of is it a client specific need? Is it an internal need where we have made a decision to upskill our employees? For example, if I use an example, we made a decision same time last year in the summer that we need to upskill our data engineers into the latest and greatest stacks, right? And there are so many technology stacks available. You can do Fabric, you can do Snowflake, you can do Databricks. So we kind of took a decision that we will have specific training programs so that as companies move towards these lake houses, how do they adapt to some of these technologies and tools? And not only from a skill perspective, but more importantly, from an architecture perspective. So today it may be Databricks, tomorrow it may be something else. But once they understand the lakehouse effect, once they understand the architecture, they're able to adapt quickly to it. So going back to the mantra, right skills at the right time.
That's great to hear. And we'll go specific into the technology side of things. Before we get into that, right now, one of the very popular methods across organizations is what is called a self-paced learning, where you assign certain number of hours that one person has to complete, and you expect that things will turn out in their own. But there are, I mean, always sprint cycles happening, delivery pressures there, customer demands keep on changing. What is your take on just assigning targets and self-paced learning to the organization?
So there are two parts in your question. One is how do you assign goals which are
Yeah.
achievable? And second, how do you motivate people to get things done? Right? So let me
Yes.
answer the first part. How do you assign goals which you can motivate your own workforce? So incentivization happens at multiple levels, right? Incentivization happens, one is to clearly say that you are a Java developer, and if you have to move to full stack, you have to achieve a certain level of skills. So you tie some of these programs to your own career trajectory. The second one is clearly articulating the investment the company is doing for their own employee pool. Now, what I mean by that is we don't differentiate between employees. We have a fixed amount for learning budgets for every employee in the company. Now, depending on the role and the business need, they choose to go and sign up for those programs We would rather have them come and sign up, because then the yield on the time and effort and the dollar investments of the company is much higher if that self motivation is there. I was talking to our L&D head, and he brought in a concept about how learning is different between adults and younger generations.
Yeah.
You can put a younger generation in a classroom and kind of ask them to adapt, but you can't put a bunch of 40 adults and say, we're going to train you on something. They have to see value. If I do this particular skill or program, if I do a level 3 certification for data with Databricks, it helps me and equips me to do better. Or a certification with AWS, it helps me to deliver better. In one of the white papers, I don't know if you remember, Nikhil, but we did last year with Zinnov,
Yeah.
right? We looked at how GenAI is impacting developer productivity, if you
Yes.
recollect.
Yes.
In that white paper, it came out clearly that when we did GenAI based enablement of our engineering talent, what we found out was when you did the same program to a junior engineer, a mid level engineer, and a senior level engineer, the outcomes were very different because their experience levels was different. Their ability to make AI and Gen AI in a strategic way is different. So, how do you build a L&D program for a career trajectory of a person's goal
Yeah.
and make sure that they can keep doing that across on a monthly, quarterly basis? So, adjacency is important from a skilling perspective. And it's not necessarily that cross skilling will yield the better results. And we have seen cross skilling yields are much lower from an employee productivity and employee motivation perspective than looking at adjacent skilling.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it took us almost 15, 20 minutes to reach to Gen AI. In 2025, that's an achievement in itself. But now that we're here, let's just deep down on specifically on Gen AI. We know that Gen AI is fast changing, right? Every month or every week, there are new benchmarks coming, new tools coming, new frameworks coming. So, how do we look at Gen AI holistically is the question.
So let me cite two different views here. One, if I quote the same white paper we did, there were two takeaways from that. What we found out was GenAI tools like a GitHub Copilot, which was pretty prevalent last year,
Yeah.
was used for pair programming between engineers and offered contextual code, suggestions, explanations, and examples. The big takeaway is how these tools are helping from a real time learning assistance perspective. So, if I'm a techie working today, some of the tools at my disposal, whether it's from Atlassian, from Microsoft, or others, help me to really become more productive. So, the learning quotient is exponentially getting higher when we actually infuse them with some of the GenAI tools. That's number one. Number two, what we found out was there's almost 70% of the engineers who went through that program reported improved engagement scores for those programs where the GenAI was infused. Now, that was something which we did not expect, but it came out of that. Now, where people are on Instagram, TikTok, they are expecting things to be very bite sized and something very impactful in 30 seconds. And that's where something like infusing GenAI into the curriculum or into your programs can really make it more gamified, or to that matter, more contextualized. Right?
Yeah.
Some people like gamification. For example, I have an 18-year-old daughter. If you say, hey, you have to study biology, she's like, Dad, no. But if you actually gamify biology, she loves it, right? So it's kind of how you infuse education to the kids. The same way, I think adults are also getting used thanks to Insta and all of the other stuff which is available. There's a huge shift happening there. Now, on the second perspective, and this is more from my personal journey perspective, you know, infusing Gen AI makes us smarter, makes us work faster, and makes us more adaptive. Number two, skill gap analysis, right? So, two people in the same team may have different gaps in terms of their skills. How do you really benchmark that and make it more? So this is more what I would call as adaptive learning. That's the second part. And third part, I would say, is more real time. And fourth one would be more customization at scale. Because today, if you see, there are so many drives by the hyperscalers to say you have to get the certifications. How do you really say, where do I start my certification journey with one of the hyperscalers? And it kind of gives you today a roadmap in terms of what are your interests, what's your job profile, what's your experience, and this is the first certification you need to take, and these are the three things you need to do beyond. So I feel there are so many opportunities where GenAI makes an impact.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I mean, I can resonate with that because we are also trying to solve some of those problems internally. And just one point on the motivation side that you mentioned, right? That how do we bridge the motivation levels and ensure that everybody goes along?
So the way I would say it is, I'm a big believer there's no one size fits all approach to learning, right? And our ecosystem within the firm reflects that very well. Almost 94% of our Nest population is engaged in learning over the last 12 months, which actually is a very good sign for me. Now, what does it mean? It's not about a one off program, it's about how do we continuously engage with them, right? And how do we make sure that it becomes part of the DNA of the company and the culture of the company there? One thing is key is we have strongly believed that learning is a personal responsibility of each and every employee of the organization. Because once you start enforcing, it becomes like I'm being told to do it versus I need to do it. Especially we are a services organization, so we have to stay relevant and be ready to serve our customers in terms of what they are looking for. But it is a personal responsibility of the individual. Now, in terms of roles, we see a reduction in junior roles as GenAI automates more of those entry level tasks. Today, if I'm a entry level engineer,
Yeah.
40% of my tasks can be done by a tool. So there is a little bit of that calibration required. That's where the middle management really becomes more critical. And they help us focus on leveraging AI tools, optimizing performance, and more importantly, helps us in having better team dynamics there.
That's a good point. Now, let's say, assume we were starting from a completely blank slate. There is no LMS baggage. There is no budget constraint. How would you then look at designing an L&D program grounds up? What are the top two or three things you will take into consideration if you have to design first principles based learning system today?
Okay, I'll give three or four points which come top of my mind. Number one, like you said, it has to be very contextualized to the individual or the role, right? A sales engineer is requires would be very different than what a technical engineer would need from the same content. A sales engineer also needs to know how AWS is coming up with this new data platform and his ability to understand the platform so that he or she can articulate that to a client or a prospect is very different than the same data platform where the data engineer who's a level 2 or level 3 engineer understanding that would be very different. Number two, big gap, big challenge today for organization is how do you know what are the skill gaps you have, right? And that's where new platforms, new technologies like AI have helped us detect gaps, like a data analyst needing Python and Power BI and curating targeted micro courses for that individual so that come any problem he or she is serving in a particular client scenario, they're able to address it. Now, these are two heterogeneous technology stacks, but how do you make sure that those two are absolutely essentially required for a level 2, level 3 data analyst? That's the second most important thing. It's not about the platform, but it's about how do you know what is the need of the individual, right? The third one, as we spoke briefly, I am a big believer in gamification. So real-time adaptation of the content. If somebody is already, if I take up a course on Python or and they know that I am breezing through some of the basics, the content has to adapt itself to really get giving me more capstone projects, giving me more tougher challenges to solve for, right? that adaptation has to be very real time, online, and has to be specific there. A lot of content is available today that it is meant for the masses, but it's not customized for the individual. So customization also plays an important role. So just to summarize, role-based personalization, skill gap analysis, real-time adaptation, and the fourth is customization at scale. These are the four things which I would want to set as a foundation before I embark on bringing an L&D platform, or even to that matter, investing in some of those futuristic investments which can help upskill my workforce here.
I think that's a great summary. So, last question that I have is that if you were advising one of your peers today from a different tech services company, what is one thing that you will ask them to completely stop doing right now when it comes to upskilling? And what is one thing they must absolutely start doing from tomorrow?
I think I'll ask them to stop doing upskilling as an initiative, which is kind of antithesis for this discussion.
Yeah.
But I'll actually say that reimagine what roles the organization needs for today and tomorrow, and then look at upskilling as a means to achieve that, not the other way around. Right. So that's what I would say. So, and what I would ask them to really start doing tomorrow is anticipate what tomorrow requires, but also have a balance between what the today's needs and tomorrow's needs. The challenge we have, and I read this in a research paper, is many times when people go through these programs and they're not given an opportunity to apply the learning,
Yes.
it's the investment is not of benefit. So as much as you want to put 100,000 people on a GenAI training, do you have an opportunity to keep this 100,000 people and apply that in their day jobs within a reasonable time, 30, 60 days? Otherwise, that investment is pretty much written off, right? So I would say, while there are a lot of boardroom push about let's Gen AI enable our workforce, you have to be very clear where it actually makes an impact.
Absolutely. So, just summarizing what we saw today, right? And we started with
Yeah.
the topic saying that upskilling is like the biggest buzzword trend that is there, especially last couple of years. I mean, it's always been there. There's always been L&D teams in services firms. But right now, there is a lot of skepticism also around upskilling, whether we are really doing what we need to do. And the answer always, as always, lies somewhere in between. Based on the discussion that we have had today, hopefully people would have learned some of the best practices that you shared today, Mahesh, and that will help them in redefining or redesigning how they look at L&D as well. Thanks a lot for your time, Mahesh. I hope the audience found this useful as well. And it was lovely speaking to you today.
Thank you, Nikhil. If I may just make a closing comment, I really like this format of hot takes and hard truths. You did not constrain my thoughts to a certain subject. You kind of kept it open ended. Thank you. And thanks for Zinnov for giving me this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Nice.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Business Resilience Series. Stay tuned for more such interesting episodes. You can listen to our podcast on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast from. To know more about Zinnov, visit our website, www.zinnov.com, or drop us a note at info@zinnov.com. Follow us on Twitter @Zinnov for regular updates on our content. Thank you again for listening to the Business Resilience Series of the Zinnov Podcast.